The Punic Wars, 264 to 146 BCE, were three conflicts between Rome and Carthage, ending with Carthage's destruction, its people enslaved, and Rome dominating the western Mediterranean. These conflicts began around 275 BCE when Rome became the leader and protector of Italy. Rome needed to protect Italy from foreign threats, so it couldn't let the nearby island of Sicily fall to a powerful rival. Carthage wanted to conquer Sicily to strengthen its control over the western Mediterranean. The immediate cause of the first conflict was a crisis in Messina, a city controlling the straits between Italy and Sicily. The Mamertini, a group of Campanian mercenaries, had taken over the town but were under attack by Hieron II of Syracuse in 264 BCE. The Mamertini sought help from both Rome and Carthage. The Carthaginians arrived first, took control of Messana, and made peace with Hieron. The Roman commander sent troops into Messana and captured the Carthaginian admiral during a meeting, forcing his withdrawal. This act sparked war with Carthage and Syracuse. The conflict started with a joint attack on Messana, which the Romans quickly repelled. In 263 BCE, the Romans invaded Hieron's territory, forcing him to seek peace and ally with them. In 262 BCE, the Romans captured the Carthaginian base at Agrigentum but struggled to take the fortresses in western Sicily and the inland towns. In 260 BCE, the Romans built their first large fleet. Near Milazzo, off Sicily's northern coast, Admiral Gaius Duilius defeated a more maneuverable Carthaginian fleet by grappling and boarding their ships. In 259 BCE, Rome captured Corsica and expelled the Carthaginians but couldn't drive them out of Sicily. In 256 BCE, a large Roman fleet defeated the Carthaginian navy off Cape Ecnomus, near modern Licata, and set up a fortified camp in Africa at Clypea, modern Calibia, Tunisia. The disorganized Carthaginian forces couldn't resist the Roman invaders or stop rebellions among their subjects. After one campaign, they sought peace, but the harsh terms offered by Roman commander Marcus Attilius Regulus were unacceptable. Following advice from Greek mercenary captain Xanthippus, the Carthaginians built a new army focused on cavalry and elephants. In 255 BCE, under Xanthippus' command, they defeated Regulus near Tunis, outmaneuvering him and destroying most of his army. A second Roman fleet arrived in Africa after defeating the Carthaginian navy off Cape Hermium and evacuated the remaining Roman troops. The Romans shifted focus back to Sicily, capturing the key fortress of Palermo in 254 BCE. However, with Carthage sending reinforcements, the war reached a stalemate. In 251 or 250 BCE, Roman general Lucius Caecilius Metellus won a decisive battle near Panormus, severely weakening the Carthaginian forces. Following this, the Romans began a land and sea siege of Carthage's main bases at Marsala and Trapani. The Roman besiegers faced strong resistance and, in 249 BCE, were forced to withdraw after their fleet was defeated in a surprise attack at Trapani. Admiral Publius Claudius Pulcher was repulsed, losing 93 ships. This was the Romans' only naval defeat in the war, but their fleet had already suffered heavy losses due to storms, leaving them too weakened to continue the attack on Sicily. Meanwhile, the Carthaginians, also burdened by the financial strain of the long conflict, reduced their forces and did not attempt a counterattack. The main feature of the following campaigns was the skillful guerrilla warfare led by the Carthaginian commander Hamilcar Barca from his strongholds in western Sicily, effectively preventing the Roman land army from attacking Lilybaeum. In 242 BCE, Rome resumed naval operations, with private citizens funding the construction of a fleet of 200 warships to renew the blockade of Lilybaeum. The Carthaginians quickly assembled a relief force, but in a battle off the Egadi Islands, west of Drepanum, on March 10, 241 BCE, their fleet was caught at a disadvantage and mostly destroyed or captured. This victory gave Rome undisputed control of the sea, ensuring the eventual fall of the Punic strongholds in Sicily. The Carthaginians, having lost control of the sea, opened negotiations and agreed to peace. They ceded Sicily and the Aeoli Islands to Rome and paid an indemnity of 3,200 talents. The loss of naval supremacy not only ended Carthage's dominance in the western Mediterranean, but also left their overseas empire vulnerable to disintegration from renewed Roman attacks. The Roman people's resolve was quickly shown when a conflict broke out between the Carthaginians and their disgruntled mercenaries. Rome violated the peace treaty by sending a force to occupy Sardinia, even though the island's insurgent garrison had offered to surrender it in 238 BCE. In response to Carthage's protests, Rome declared war. They only held off their attack after Carthage formally ceded Sardinia and Corsica and agreed to pay an additional indemnity. This episode made it clear that Rome intended to fully exploit its victory. To avoid total humiliation, Carthage had no choice but to try to humiliate Rome in return. However, the internal and external struggles Carthage faced had weakened its power, making the prospect of renewing the war under favorable conditions seem unlikely. Hamilcar Barca became the champion of Carthage's plan to prepare for a new conflict with Rome. To compensate for the loss of Sicily, he focused on acquiring territory in Spain, where Carthage could gain wealth and establish a new base for operations. With unrestricted foreign command, he spent the rest of his life building a Carthaginian empire in Spain, 237 to 228 BCE. Hamilcar Barca's work was continued by his son-in-law Hasdrubal and his son Hannibal, who became the commander of the Carthaginian army in 221 BCE. Their conquests raised suspicions in Rome, which, in a treaty with Hasdrubal, restricted Carthaginian territory to the south of the Ebro River. At the same time, Rome formed an alliance with Saguntum, a town south of the Ebro on the east coast. In 219 BCE, Hannibal besieged Saguntum and, despite a fierce defense, captured the town. It is debated whether Hannibal's attack on Saguntum violated the new treaty, but the Romans certainly saw it as a breach and demanded his surrender. However, Hannibal's aggressive stance was very popular, and the Carthaginian council supported his actions, leading to a declaration of war from Rome. The Romans believed their naval superiority would allow them to choose the battlefield, planning to send one army to Spain and another to Sicily and Africa. However, before their preparations were finished, Hannibal took the initiative, launching a series of operations that would control the course of the war for most of its duration. Hannibal understood that as long as Rome controlled the united Italian Confederacy, no foreign attack could defeat them permanently. To weaken Rome, he devised a plan to take the war into Italy, aiming to disrupt the alliance. Although the chances of reaching Italy seemed slim, with the Roman fleets controlling the sea, and the land route being long and difficult, Hannibal believed it was his best strategy. Hannibal's boldness was key to his success. After a 6-month journey through Spain, Gaul, and the Alps, which the Romans couldn't stop, he reached the Plain in autumn 218. Hannibal's force of 20,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry was made up of the best soldiers from Africa and Spain. Though some Roman troops tried to stop his advance, the Carthaginian cavalry's superiority and widespread uprisings among the Gauls forced the defenders to retreat to the Apennines. At the end of the year, The Roman army, reinforced by troops from Sicily, marched to battle near the Trebia River. However, Hannibal used superior tactics to defeat the much larger Roman force, securing his position in northern Italy. In 217, the campaign began in Etruria, where Hannibal's army, reinforced by Gauls, entered through an unguarded pass. A reckless pursuit by the Roman army under Gaius Flaminius resulted in the Romans being trapped on the shores of Lake Trasimene, where they were destroyed, losing at least 15,000 men. The defeat left Rome vulnerable, but Hannibal chose not to attack the capital. Instead, he decided to march towards southern Italy, planning to gather a larger, more powerful force before striking. In southern Italy, Hannibal aimed to rally the peoples who had once been Rome's fiercest enemies. However, the Italians were slow to join him. Meanwhile, a new Roman army led by the dictator Quintus Fabius Maximus adopted a strategy of avoiding direct confrontation, known as the Fabian strategy. This earned Fabius the nickname Cunctator, delayer. Instead of engaging Hannibal, Fabius followed him through Apulia and Campania, preventing the Carthaginian general from establishing a permanent base of operations. The campaign of 216 began with a shift away from the Fabian strategy, as Rome adopted a more aggressive approach. Rome assembled an exceptionally large army of about 85,000 men, aiming to defeat the Carthaginians in open battle. On August 2, 216 BCE, near Cannae in Apulia, the Roman legions launched their attack. Hannibal, having carefully chosen the battlefield, intentionally let his center be pushed back by the Romans' superior numbers. As the Romans advanced, Hannibal's cavalry swung around to attack their flanks and rear. Surrounded on all sides and packed too tightly to fight effectively, the Roman army was almost completely annihilated. Approximately one-fifth of Rome's fighting-age men were killed, making it one of the Republic's most devastating losses in terms of citizen casualties. The battle's psychological impact was equally significant. Encouraged by Rome's defeat, many southern Italian peoples finally broke away from Roman control, led by Capua, then the second largest city in Italy. Reinforcements arrived from Carthage, and several neutral powers prepared to support Hannibal. Yet, despite the scale of the victory at Cannae, it surprisingly did not end the war. Despite heavy losses in men and money, Rome's resources were not fully depleted. In northern and central Italy, the rebellion remained limited and could be contained with small garrisons. In the south, the Greek coastal towns stayed loyal to Rome, while the Latin colonies played a key role by disrupting communication among the rebels and tying down some of their forces. In Rome, internal conflicts between nobles and commons ceased, leading to an unprecedented unity. The Senate took full control of military operations, maintaining a steady policy that ultimately led to victory. The later campaigns in Italy took on a different tone. Although Rome managed to raise up to 200,000 troops, only a moderate number could be deployed in the field. Generals like Fabius and Marcus Claudius Marcellus, often in key roles, avoided direct battles with Hannibal, focusing instead on monitoring his movements and skirmishing with smaller detachments. Hannibal, despite gaining new allies, had to allocate troops to protect them and maintain their loyalty, leaving him too weak to launch a strong offensive. In the following years, the war devolved into numerous smaller skirmishes. In 216 and 215 BCE, the main conflict centered in Campania, where Hannibal, attempting unsuccessfully to secure a foothold on the coast, suffered a significant setback at Nola. In 214 BCE, Hannibal moved his main force to Apulia, aiming to capture Tarentum. While he gained control of Crotona and Locri on the southern coast, he still lacked a suitable harbor to establish reliable overseas communications. For 2 years, Hannibal unsuccessfully sought an opportunity to seize Taranto, while the Romans reduced the rebellion in Campania and defeated other Carthaginian commanders. In 213 to 212 BCE, Hannibal gained control of most of Taranto and other cities along the southern coast. By 212, the Romans had grown strong enough to lay siege to Capua. The Romans decisively defeated a Carthaginian relief force and held their ground, even against Hannibal's attempts to dislodge them. In 211 BCE, Hannibal tried to divert the siege with a feigned attack on Rome, but the besiegers remained steadfast. Eventually, Capua was starved into surrender. The fall of Capua signaled that no rival Italian coalition could ultimately stand against Rome. After a year of scattered fighting, the Romans achieved another major victory in 209 BCE by recapturing Taranto. Although Hannibal continued to win occasional battles, he was gradually pushed back into the far south of Italy. In 207 BCE, a new crisis emerged with the arrival of Hasdrubal, Hannibal's brother, who had marched overland from Spain in 208 to 207. He reached northern Italy with a force nearly as large as the one Hannibal had brought in 218 BCE. After raising contingents of Gauls and Ligurians, Hasdrubal marched down the east coast, aiming to join Hannibal in central Italy for a direct assault on Rome. By this point, the constant strain of men and resources had weakened the Carthaginian confederacy, and some of their most loyal allies began to protest their inability to provide further support. Despite the strain, the Romans made a supreme effort, increasing their war establishment to its largest ever, and sending a strong field army to confront each Carthaginian leader. The threat to Rome was largely averted by the quick thinking and bold action of Consul Gaius Claudius Nero, who commanded the main Roman army in the south. Realizing that Hannibal would not move beyond Apulia until his brother had established contact, Nero secretly left with part of his troops. He arrived just in time to reinforce his colleague, Marcus Livius Salinator, whose forces had recently encountered Hasdrubal near Sena Gallica. The combined Roman army thwarted Hasdrubal's attempt to escape and forced him to fight near the Metaurus River. The battle was closely fought until Nero executed a clever flanking maneuver that cut off the enemy's retreat. Hasdrubal was killed, and most of his army was destroyed. The campaign of 207 BCE effectively decided the war in Italy. Although Hannibal remained in southern Italy for several more years, his position was largely due to Rome's exhaustion from the immense strain of previous years, which had led to a reduction in Roman forces. In 203 BCE, Italy was finally cleared of Carthaginian troops. Following orders from Carthage, Hannibal sailed back to Africa. Meanwhile, an expedition led by his brother Mago, which had sailed to Liguria in 205 BCE, and tried to stir up discontent in Cisalpine Gaul and Etruria, was forced to retreat. Alongside the main conflict in Italy, the Second Punic War was also fought on other fronts. The First Macedonian War, 215 to 205 BCE, began when King Philip V of Macedon, sensing a decline in Roman power after the Battle of Cannae, sought to expand his influence in Illyria. This forced the Romans to stretch their already strained resources even further by sending troops to Greece. For a time, Roman diplomacy managed to curb Philip's ambitions in Greece, and the deployment of a patrol squadron in the Adriatic Sea prevented any meaningful cooperation between Philip and Hannibal. Due to the stagnation of agriculture in Italy, the Romans had to rely on Sardinia and Sicily for their food supply. In 215 BCE, the Carthaginians attacked Sardinia, but a small Roman force was enough to repel the invasion. In Sicily, a more serious conflict emerged. While isolated attacks by Punic squadrons were easily thwarted by the powerful Roman fleet, internal issues began to surface. The death of Hieron II, Rome's loyal ally, left the kingdom of Syracuse to his young and inexperienced grandson, Hieronymus. Flattered by Carthaginian emissaries, the young prince Hieronymus broke with Rome. However, before hostilities could begin, he was assassinated. The Syracusan people then rejected the monarchy and restored their republican constitution. But, misled by false threats of severe Roman retaliation, they were ultimately manipulated by the Carthaginians. The Roman army and fleet under Marcellus, which besieged Syracuse, were thwarted by the ingenious mechanical defenses of the Syracusan mathematician Archimedes in 213 BCE. Meanwhile, the rebellion against Rome spread inland, and a Carthaginian fleet captured several towns along the southern coast. In 212 BCE, Marcellus finally broke through Syracuse's defenses, and despite a Carthaginian relief force arriving, he took control of the entire city by spring 211 BCE. A guerrilla warfare campaign ensued, with the Carthaginians initially holding the upper hand until they lost their base at Agrigentum in 210 BCE. The Carthaginians were gradually pushed out of their remaining positions, and by the end of the year, Rome had regained full control of Sicily. The conflict in Spain was crucial, second only to the war in Italy. The Carthaginians relied on Spain for troops and money to support Hannibal, making it vital for the Romans to challenge them there. Initially, Rome sent a small force, relying on its own resources, but the Scipio brothers, Publius and Gnaeus, were skilled commanders. Through strategy and diplomacy, they won over the peoples north of the Ebro, defeated the Carthaginian general Hasdrubal Barca, and advanced along the east coast into the heart of enemy territory. The Scipio's successes were eventually undone by a reckless advance. Abandoned by their local allies and trapped by Carthaginian cavalry, with the Numidian prince Massinissa playing a key role, the Roman generals were killed and their army destroyed in 211 BCE. Despite this, the Spanish campaign effectively prevented Hannibal from receiving reinforcements in Italy, and tied up important Carthaginian resources. Disturbances in Africa prevented the Carthaginian commanders from fully exploiting their victory. Soon after the fall of Capua, which allowed Rome to send troops from Italy to Spain, the young Publius Cornelius Scipio, son of the earlier general, took command in 210 BCE. He marked his arrival with a bold and successful raid on the Carthaginian arsenal in Cartagena in 209 BCE. Although he couldn't stop Hasdrubal Barca from heading to Italy after the Battle of Balan in 208 BCE, Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, used Hasdrubal's departure to quickly push back the remaining Carthaginian forces. A final Carthaginian attempt to regain control with a new army was defeated in a decisive victory at Ilipa near Seville. By the end of 206 BCE, the Carthaginians were driven out of Spain. In 205 BCE, Scipio, having returned to Rome to serve as consul, proposed an attack on Carthage's home territory to build on his victories. Although Hannibal's presence in Italy initially deterred Fabius and other senators from approving this plan, Scipio gradually overcame their resistance. He assembled and strengthened his forces in Sicily before sailing to Africa in 204 BCE. There, he faced a combined army from Carthage and King Syphax of Numidia, and for a time, he was trapped near Utica. However, during the winter, Scipio launched a surprise attack on the enemy's camp, destroying the entire allied force by sword or fire. In the campaign of 203 BCE, Scipio destroyed a new Carthaginian force on the plains about 75 miles (120 kilometers) from Utica. He captured Carthage's ally, King Syphax, and reinstated the renegade Massinissa as ruler of the kingdom from which Syphax had recently expelled him. These setbacks led the Carthaginians to seek peace, but before Scipio's moderate terms could be finalized, a change in sentiment caused them to break off negotiations and recall Hannibal's army for one final battle. In 202 BCE, Hannibal took command of a combined force of Carthaginian citizens, mercenaries, and his veteran Italian troops. After an unsuccessful conference with Scipio, Hannibal prepared for a decisive battle at Zama. Scipio's force was smaller in numbers but highly trained, with his cavalry, led by Massinissa and Gaius Laelius, vastly superior. Scipio's infantry evaded an attack by Carthaginian elephants, and broke through the first two lines of Hannibal's forces but struggled to defeat the reserve corps of Hannibal's veterans. The battle was ultimately decided by the Roman cavalry and their ally Massinissa, who executed a maneuver similar to the tactics used at Cannae, attacking Hannibal's forces from the rear and destroying them completely. With their last army lost, the Carthaginians sought peace and accepted Scipio's terms. They were forced to cede Spain and the remaining Mediterranean islands, surrender their warships, pay an indemnity of 10,000 talents over 50 years, and give up their independence in matters of war and foreign policy. The Second Punic War, the greatest struggle either power had faced, ended in Rome's complete triumph. This outcome wasn't due to any major flaws in the Carthaginian strategy. The First Punic War and the Second Punic War outside Italy show that the Romans were superior on neutral or Carthaginian ground. Carthage could only hope to win by invading Italy and using the enemy's own resources against it. Hannibal's brilliant effort to achieve this goal failed not because of strategic errors, but because of the Romans' unbreakable will and the strength of their Italian confederacy, which remained intact despite defeat and prolonged war. The war's unique interest lies in the way individual genius, like Hannibal's, was ultimately overwhelmed by the Romans' corporate perseverance and resilience. After the Second Punic War, Carthage's political power was greatly diminished, but its commerce and material resources revived quickly in the 2nd century BCE, drawing the jealousy of Rome's growing mercantile class and the concern of influential Roman statesmen. Under the influence of these sentiments, and fueled by the persistent belief of Cato the Censor that Carthage must be destroyed, delenda est Carthago, the more moderate factions were overruled. A cause for war was found when the Carthaginians breached their treaty in 150 BCE by resisting the aggressions of Massinissa with force. A Roman army was sent to Africa, and although the Carthaginians agreed to make reparations by giving hostages and surrendering their weapons, they were pushed into revolt by the further Roman demand that they relocate to an inland area where they would be prohibited from engaging in commerce. In a desperate attempt to defend themselves, the Carthaginians created new war equipment and fortified their city for a siege in 149 BCE. The Roman attack failed for 2 years until the command was given to Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of the former conqueror of Carthage, Scipio Africanus. Scipio Aemilianus strengthened the blockade by walling off the isthmus on which the city was located and cutting off its supply lines. His main assault came from the harbor side, where he managed to breach the city's defenses despite fierce and inventive resistance. The siege continued relentlessly as Scipio captured the streets leading to the citadel, house by house. At the final surrender of Carthage, only 50,000 of its population, which may have exceeded 250,000, remained. The survivors were sold into slavery, the city was completely destroyed, and its site was cursed to remain desolate forever. The territory of Carthage, which had already been reduced by Massinissa's encroachments, was turned into the Roman province of Africa. The Punic Wars were a defining chapter in the history of Rome, shaping its future as a dominant power in the Mediterranean. The wars, full of legendary battles, strategic brilliance, and fierce rivalries forever altered the course of Western civilization. What do you think was the most pivotal moment of the Punic Wars? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this epic story.